Hello, I'm Greg Goss and welcome to Learning the Guitar Made Cheap, Easy, and Fun. In this video, I'm going to be covering the fundamentals of rhythm guitar, lead guitar, and fingerstyle guitar. My aim is to help you build up a foundation of guitar technique so that you can then apply your skills to whatever songs and styles of music you want to play. Now, I'll be starting out from square one here, so if you're somebody with no experience playing guitar or limited experience, then this is the video for you. Now, one thing I do want to confess is that the title of this video may be just a little bit misleading, and particularly the part about learning the guitar being easy, because this is not an easy process. It does take some work. But the key is consistency. So if you're going to do this, commit to practicing a certain amount of time each day. Give yourself at least a half an hour, and if you can do that, your playing will improve. Now, this video will start out with some basics. We'll cover things like the parts of the guitar, the strings, we'll learn how to tune a guitar, and so on. And once we get through that, we'll get to work on some actual playing. So with that, let's get started and have a little fun. Did you know that Elvis always drank Gatorade before exercising? Okay, that's a trick question. I don't think that man ever exercised. But if you can remember that line, Elvis always drank Gatorade before exercising, then you have an easy way to remember the strings. So we have E, A, D, G, B, and E. The guitar has a low E string and has a high E string. And the strings are numbered 1 through 6. So the low E string is string number 6 and the high E string is string number 1. Now the fingers on the playing hand are 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I refer to the left hand, I'm referring to the playing hand, or the hand that frets the notes. And whenever we talk about going up and down on the neck, it is always in reference to pitch. So if we're going across strings, up is this direction, if the pitch is getting higher, down is this direction. Then if we're on a string, up is this direction and down is this direction. The guitar is a fretted instrument, and the frets are these metal bars, and they're what separate the notes on the guitar. Most electric guitars have between 21 and 24 frets. Acoustic guitars generally have less frets. When we talk about playing on a particular fret, we don't play on the bar itself. We actually play in the space beneath the bar so that the string is pressed against wood and not metal. Now the guitar neck is chunked up in a series of half steps. So if you go from one fret to the very next fret, that's a half a step. If you went from a fret up 2 frets, that would be a step or a full step. If you went up 3 frets, that would be a step and a half, etc., etc. As for holding the guitar, it's really just a matter of what's comfortable to you. The main thing is just that it's held snug against your body and anchored down on this quad or this quad. Okay, up next we'll look at the parts of the guitar. So up here we have the headstock. These are the tuning machines or the tuning pegs. The noisy things, of course, are the strings. This long part is the neck. Where the strings cross at the top of the neck, that's the nut. Where they cross at the base of the guitar, that's the bridge. The thin strip of wood on top of the neck, that's the fretboard, and the frets are inlaid directly into the fretboard, although not every guitar has a fretboard. These dots that you see on top of the neck, those are the fret markers. And the fret markers are basically just guides that help us navigate around the neck easier. The standard positions for the fret markers are the 3rd fret, the 5th fret, the 7th fret, the 9th fret, and then a double marker at the 12th fret. There are more fret markers that continue up the neck, which are basically just whatever these ones are, add 12. So there is some math involved here. Continuing on, we have the body of the guitar, we have the strap holders, we have the input jack, we have the volume and tone control knobs, we have the pickup selector switch, this is the pick guard, these are the pickups, and the pickups are what do the magic of transmitting sound through the amplifier. And the pickups give us a range of tones from thickest to thinnest. So for example, if we play off of the neck pickup with the pickup selector switch all the way up, that gives us the thickest tone. That's more of a lead guitar tone. It sounds like this. By contrast, if we play with the bridge pickup with the pickup selector switch all the way down, that gives us our thinnest tone, so it's more of a rhythm guitar tone. It sounds like this. The parts of an acoustic guitar are pretty similar to the parts of an electric guitar. There are a few differences, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. An acoustic guitar has a sound hole, it has a saddle, and it has a heel right here on the back of the guitar. Other than that, the parts of an acoustic guitar are pretty similar to the parts of an electric guitar. Some acoustics have pickups, others do not. Okay, next up we're going to work on tuning the guitar. There's an old saying that goes, you can't tune a guitar, but you can tune a fish. Well, I want to make that untrue for you, at least the first part of that. I'm going to show you the standard method for tuning the guitar. This is what your ancestors used, and it will work for you. To tune the guitar, we need to start by getting one string in tune, and then we can tune the rest of the guitar in relation to that string. Now the standard for tuning the guitar is to an A440 pitch. So we'll first focus on getting the A string in tune. Now where does the A pitch come from? Well, you can use a tuning fork, you can use a piano or a keyboard. I use an electronic device. Although the most important thing, at least when you're playing solo, is that the guitar is in tune with itself. Now my A string is in tune, so I'll go ahead and give you an A to tune up to. The standard tuning pattern, and as you can see, most of the action occurs here at the 5th fret. And these dots represent notes, and for each one of these notes they have an identical twin note on the open string directly above them. So for example, this note right here on the 4th fret of the G string, its identical twin note would be the open B string. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this tuning pattern to tune up the rest of my guitar. So I know that the A string is in tune, so now it's time to tune the low E string. So we start by putting a finger on the 5th fret of the low E, and I'm going to compare that to the open A string, because if the low E string is in tune, those notes should sound identical because they are the exact same note. They're twins. So let's give it a try and see where we're at. Not good. Not good at all. So the note on the low E string is sharp. It's above the desired pitch. So I need to adjust the tuning peg down so that those notes match up. Like that. Now sometimes when you're tuning, you know you're close to the note, but you can't quite find it. So in that situation, what I advise is just take the note deliberately flat. So we'll take it below the desired note, and then work our way up to pitch gradually. Like that. Okay, so the low E and A strings are in tune. Now we can work our way up the strings using the pattern. So for the D string, we place the finger on the 5th fret of the A string and compare it to the open D string. Sounds good. And for tuning the G string, we put a finger on the 5th fret of the D string, compare those notes. Sounds good. And then where the pattern changes is when we go to tune the B string. So instead of the 5th fret on the G string, we drop down to the 4th fret, compare those notes. Sounds good. Then to finish it off, we go up to the 5th fret on the B string, compare that to the high E string. Sounds good. So my guitar is in tune. I go ahead and give this a try, and keep in mind that it does take a little while to develop an ear for tuning, so just be patient. And also keep in mind that the guitar by its nature tends to be an instrument that requires a fair amount of tuning, and especially on beginner guitars. So go ahead and work on this and work on getting that guitar in tune. In the written lessons that accompany this video, I've given you all the tunes and examples in both standard musical notation and also tablature format. Now we won't get much into reading standard notation, so I want to explain to you about tablature, also known as tab. Well, tablature is basically a cheater's way of reading music, and it's only useful in learning songs you're familiar with or playing musical examples that you've heard, because tablature only gives you the notes to be played. With standard notation, you get the notes and also the rhythm. Now, rhythm is musical time. So every note or every chord you play has a certain value, a duration. You know, does it last a minute? Does it last a beat? That information you don't get with tablature. Now here we have a short blurb of an old classic, Beethoven's Für Elise, written out in tablature format. You can see there are 6 lines on the tablature staff, and each line represents a string of the guitar. So the bottom line is the low E string, and the top line is the high E string. And the numbers represent which frets to be played on the particular strings. So we start out with the 0 on the top line. That's an open high E note. Then we move on to the 4th fret of the B string, and so on until we get to the N. Now here at the end we have these notes stacked up in a column, and that represents a chord. So all of those notes are to be played together. So here's our little blurb of Für Elise. And that, my friends, is tablature. Rhythm guitar. To play rhythm guitar, no matter what the style of music, there are 3 basic skills you have to master. The first skill is to learn a few chords. Now a chord is defined as 3 or more musical tones sounded together. So you got to have at least 3 different notes to make a chord. There are a lot of different types of chords, and each has its own unique flavor and mood. The most common kind of chords are your basic major and minor chords. So here's a major chord, minor chord, minor chord, major chord. Those are used in all kinds of music: country, rock, pop, folk, reggae, you name it. Now blues tends to favor dominant chords, and those have a more distinct sound. Chords like these. Jazz also uses dominant chords, as well as a lot of 7th chords, which sound very jazzy. The rockers use a lot of power chords and suspended chords. So different styles of music tend to favor different kinds of chords, and they've each got their own unique rhythmic groove, which on the guitar comes from the picking hand. So that's the first skill for rhythm guitar, is to learn a few chords and get to the point where you can play them cleanly, so all notes are ringing out and nothing's getting choked off. And the second skill for rhythm guitar is chord changes, so going from one chord to the next, and to be able to do that evenly or in rhythm. Because when you're playing songs, you don't have a whole lot of time to get from one chord to the next. You've got to do it quickly and cleanly. So when we get to that section, we'll work on establishing a count and making chord changes on the beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the third skill for rhythm guitar is strumming. So once we've learned a few chords and gotten comfortable making chord changes, then we can add in some strumming patterns. let's get to work on some chords. We're going to learn the fundamentals of rhythm guitar using the good old G, C, D, G chord progression. That's 3 chords: G major, C major, and D major. This is probably the most common guitar chord progression of all time. It's almost like you can't call yourself a rhythm player until you can play it. Now, I admit it's not the hippest chord progression in town, but it is useful for learning rhythm. So we'll start with the G chord, and I'm going to give you 2 fingerings for G. The first is the traditional method, and the second is the way that I prefer to play it. It's a little harder to learn, but I think it's a more economical fingering, and I'll explain more about that once we get there. So first we'll look at the fingering, and then we'll look at the picking. So the first thing we want to do is take our second finger, put it on the 3rd fret of the low E string. Then we put our first finger on the 2nd fret of the A string. Then we put our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the high E string. Those are the fretted notes for this chord. It looks like this. This chord also contains the open D, G, and B strings. As for the picking, I recommend taking the pick sideways like this, placing it against your thumb, and then pressing it firmly against the index finger. You want to establish an early habit of holding the pick flat against the strings. There's a tendency to turn the pick to a slight angle when you're playing, and what that does is it creates a scratchy sound against the low strings, the low E, the A, and the D strings. So we want to avoid that. Now let's go ahead and give the G chord a try. So first, get your fingers in position down here, and with your pick flat against the low E string, take a nice strong rake across all the strings. It's not unusual to choke some notes off when you're first learning to play chords. What I find is that students tend to have their fingers too flat against the fretboard. So the cure is to push your wrist forward, create some more arc, and clear out some space, and that should help you. And the way that we test ourselves to know that our chords are clean is we arpeggiate. To arpeggiate just means to play the notes of the chord individually, like this, as opposed to strumming. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the second fingering for the G chord. This fingering starts out with the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the low E string, 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the A string, and the pinky goes up on the 3rd fret of the high E string, like this. The reason I prefer this version of the G chord is that one of the most common chord changes on guitar is from G to C. So this is the pattern for the C chord. So if we use this version of G, the transition from G to C is very smooth, as opposed to this, which is a lot less efficient. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the C chord. C chord starts out with the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the D string, and the 1st finger on the 1st fret of the B string, like this. The C chord doesn't contain the low E string. It does contain the open G and high E strings. So we start out with our pick on the A string, and we strum. Now let's take a look at the D chord. The D chord starts out with the 1st finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, and the 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the high E string, like this. The D chord doesn't contain the low E or A string, so we start out with the pick on the D string, and we strum. Now if you find you're having a struggle with the G, C, and D chords, I would advise starting out with a couple of easier chords, E minor and C major 7. You can find both of those chords on the open chord chart. Whichever set of chords you decide to work on, practice them until you can play them cold. Now what do I mean by that? I don't mean go out and play them in the snow. What I mean is that you can come home from work or school or whatever, you haven't touched a guitar all day long, but you can play those chords perfectly the first time through. Once you get to that level, you're ready for chord changes. I'm assuming that since you made it to this part in the video, you've mastered a few chords, so you can play them cold. Now what we need to do is put our chords together and work on making chord changes in time. Now here we have the G, C, D, G chord progression on a musical staff. Music on a staff is organized into measures or bars, which are segments of musical time. Now right here and right here we have bar lines, so that means we have a total of 4 bars. And bars have a certain number of beats. That's indicated by the time signature. So right here, 4/4 time. The top number is the number of beats per bar, and the bottom number is the note value that gets the beat. So 4/4 means there are 4 quarter notes per bar. In the next section we'll learn more about the different note values in 4/4 time, the quarter notes, 16th notes, 8th notes, etc. But for now we're just going to focus on quarter notes. So that means we're going to play each chord 4 times before transitioning to the next chord. So the first thing we need to do is establish an even 4 count. And then we need to establish a tempo or a speed for our count. Now I'll go ahead and demonstrate this at a moderate tempo. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. G, 2, 3, 4, C, 3, 4, G, 2. Now the difficulty in this lies at the transition points between beat 4 and beat 1 of the new measure. There's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. The first thing that has to happen is you have to play the chord on beat 4 and give it a chance to shine. But then at some point you need to bail off of it, readjust your fingers for the new chord, and nail that new chord right on beat 1 of the new measure. And the way to be successful at this is just to practice at a very, very slow tempo. Even if it needs to be exaggerated, like 1, 2, 3, well then so be it. The important thing at this stage is that your changes are even no matter what the tempo. So work on this, and when you get to the point where you can make your changes without any hesitation between chords, then you're ready for strumming. Before we get to the strumming patterns, I want to take a moment and review the main note values in 4/4 time. Now 4/4 is the most common time signature of all. It's so common that it's referred to as common time. So sometimes on a musical staff, instead of seeing the 4/4, there will just be a C, which represents common time, 4/4. Now the largest note value in 4/4 time is the whole note. It's an open circle, and it gets 4 beats, so it just rides out the whole measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then next we have half notes, which are an open circle and a stem. Half notes get 2 beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4. For the strumming patterns, we won't be using any whole notes or half notes. Sorry guys, you just don't make the cut. Then next we have our old friends, the quarter notes. And a quarter note is a dark circle and a stem. Quarter notes get 1 beat. And for the strumming, we'll just do downstrokes for quarter notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And next we have 8 notes. 8 notes are a dark circle, a stem, and 1 flag. 8 notes get half of a beat, and they're counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So for the strumming, we'll just do a downstroke on the beat and then an upstroke on the end of the beat. So 1, 2, 3. Then last we have 16th notes. A dark circle, a stem, and 2 flags. 16th notes get a quarter of a beat. Now the pace really starts to pick up when we get to 16th notes because we're squeezing 4 notes into the space of a beat. And 16th notes are counted 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. So for the strumming, we'll just alternate between downstrokes and upstrokes, starting with a downstroke on the beat. So. Now the strumming patterns we're going to do only involve quarter notes, 8th notes, and 16th notes. So let's get to it. Well, we've made it to phase 3 of learning rhythm guitar, strumming. This means we're dangerously close to becoming rhythm players. When you can play chords, make chord changes in time, and keep a strum going, then you're pretty well ready to go start your own band. Maybe not a very good one, but you're on your way. Now technically you already know one strumming pattern. When we worked on chord changes, we did a consecutive quarter note strumming pattern. Not the most interesting strumming in the world, but it is available. And now that we understand about eighth notes and 16th notes, we can always do consecutive eighth note or consecutive 16th note strumming patterns. Again, these are a little bit on the lame side, but they are available. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a few real strumming patterns. Now this first strumming pattern is very, very common. It's just a quarter note on beat 1, and then eighth notes on beats 2, 3, and 4. Sounds like this. And the second pattern just alternates between quarter notes and eighth notes, so quarter notes on beats 1 and 3 and eighth notes on beats 2 and 4. Sounds like this. Then our third pattern uses mostly eighth notes, but there is a quarter note on beat 3. You get the idea on that one. Let's go ahead and move on to the more fun one. So this pattern number 4 uses a combination of quarter, eighth, and 16th notes. So quarter note on beat 1, eighth notes on beat 2, and 16th notes on beats 3 and 4. Sounds like this. So go ahead and give these patterns a try, but keep in mind that these are just a few options. So go ahead and apply what you've learned about rhythm and the different note values in 4/4 time, and see what other patterns you can come up with. Okay, I think we're in good position now to play a tune. This one's a bit of an oldie, takes us back about 300 years, give or take. So here we have the chord progression to Pachelbel's canon using 5 chords: C, G, A minor, E minor, and F major 7. Now a chord progression is the movement from one chord to the next, and the progression is the harmonic structure, or the bones of the tune. Now here each chord gets 2 beats, and a good strumming pattern to start out with would be the one that alternates between quarter notes and eighth notes. So that strumming pattern applied to this progression goes like this. Now I want to show you 2 new strumming patterns, and I really like both of these. So the first one starts out with 8 notes on beat 1, and then on beat 2 there's an 8th note followed by 2 16th notes. And the way that second beat is counted is 2 and a. So we would do downstrokes on the 2 and the and then an upstroke on the So like this. 1 and 2 and a. 1, 2 and a. 1 and 2 and a. The second pattern uses triplet eighth notes. So whenever you see 8 notes strung together like this with a little 3 on top of them, that indicates triplets. So we're squeezing 3 notes into the space of a beat. And triplets are counted triplet, 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 triplet. And the strumming would just be down, up, and down, like this. Okay, so this gives you a tune with which to practice rhythm guitar. So be brave, experiment with different strumming patterns, and most of all, have some fun. You know what's nice about rhythm guitar? Well, besides everything, is that rhythm guitar chops tend to stay with you. So if you see this process through and develop some rhythm skills, you'll find that you can get back into playing rhythm pretty quickly if you haven't played guitar in a while. That's the long-term payoff for your early efforts now. So I've covered the core basics of rhythm guitar, and that should give you enough technique and knowledge to get started on playing some tunes, some simpler tunes. And just keep in mind that the key to this is consistency. It's repetition that will iron out the kinks in your playing. So kill if you have to, my friends, but do not give up, because the rewards for learning this thing are lifelong. Now go practice. Okay, we worked on chords, or playing groups of notes together. Now it's time to work on single note lines. And that's basically what lead guitar is playing single note lines for solos and melodies. Although it technically is possible to play lead with 2 notes at a time. For example, but it's mostly single notes. Now, whether you wish to become a master soloist or if you just want to play some simple melodies, I think the starting point is the same, and that's to learn a scale. So with scales, we learn how to coordinate the fingers so that we can play our single note lines efficiently. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to learn the major scale. This takes us back to 3rd grade music class, because the major scale is the do, a deer, a female deer scale. How can anyone forget that? The major scale contains 7 notes. So we have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Now what's the next note? Do, exactly. Once we get to the 8th note, or the octave, then the scale just starts all over again, 1 octave higher. So this do is the same as this do. Both notes are G, they're just an octave apart. Now this is the major scale pattern that we're going to work on. So we're looking at the guitar like this. And the numbers just represent the fingers on the playing hand. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this scale pattern covers a musical range of just a little bit more than 2 octaves. So we play the first 7 notes. That's 1 octave. Then we play the second 7 notes. That's the 2nd octave. And then just the first 2 notes going into the 3rd octave. Now with this scale pattern, the hand stays put. The fingers do all the walking, so there's no side-to-side motion at all of the hand. And we can play this anywhere on the neck that we want to, but for the purpose of showing you some tunes in the near future, I want to show you this in the key of G major. So our starting point is this 3rd fret on the low E string. We play that with the 2nd finger, and that's our root note, that's our G. Now as for hand position, the first thing to keep in mind is that the 2nd finger and the thumb should be pretty closely aligned on the neck. So if you place your 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the low E string, take a look at where it is in relation to the thumb. They should be pretty closely aligned, like this. And the hand should be squared up pretty nicely on the neck. You don't want your fingers going sideways like this. That's a bad habit that a lot of players develop. Another thing to keep in mind is that your fingers don't need to be very high up off the strings while waiting their turn to play. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate this scale pattern, first doing it ascending, or going up. I'll take a brief pause, and then I'll play it descending, going down. Then I'll play through it continuously with no breaks at all. And I'll do this using 8 notes. So here I go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's shift our attention now to the picking hand. In order to get any kind of speed or fluidity going with playing scales, we need to alternate pick, and that simply means to alternate between downstrokes and upstrokes. Now here we have the universal symbols for the downstroke and the upstroke, and then here we have the G major scale showing alternate picking throughout the scale. The picking motion should either come from the wrist or from the arm where the wrist is kept stiff. I prefer the wrist option, but it's whatever you're comfortable with. Now let's go ahead and take an up-close look at the difference between the two methods. Now I'll go ahead and play through the major scale using alternate picking so that you can see what the picking hand should look like. What I would advise is first memorizing the major scale pattern so that you can play through it without looking at your fretting hand. And that way you can focus on your picking hand and ensure that you're doing correct alternate picking. So no consecutive downstrokes or consecutive upstrokes. And then once you've gotten comfortable playing the scale using good technique with both hands, then you're ready for something a little more musical. In the next section we'll take a look at a couple of Bach tunes. With skill mastery comes certain privilege, and for you, that privilege is J.S. Bach. I've given you parts of two different Bach tunes to work on, Minuet in G and Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. Again, I chose these songs because they're in the key of G major, that way you can stick with the scale pattern you've been working on. Now, Minuet in G might sound familiar to you because it was turned into a pop song back in 1965. You've probably heard the tune called A Lover's Concerto. It goes like this. And here's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. For both of these tunes, there are sections where the fingers have to come out of their natural playing position, and that's just for the sake of a better flow. And whenever that happens, you'll see a number to the left of the note on the musical staff that indicates which finger should be used for that note. So this gives you a few tunes to learn so that way you can start to build up the repertoire. I've given you 4 scales in the written lessons: the major scale, the minor scale, the pentatonic minor scale, and the blues scale. We've covered the major scale, now let's take a look at the others. First we'll do the minor scale. We'll do this in A minor, which means our root note is on the 5th fret of the low E string. Now one thing to keep in mind about the fingering for the minor scale is that once we get to the D string, there's a fingering adjustment. Instead of playing the 2nd note with our 3rd finger, which would seem the logical option, we actually play it with our pinky, and that just sets us up for better position once we get to the G string and to finish off the scale. So here's the minor scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pentatonic minor scale is the easiest of the 4 scales. It only uses 2 fingers per string, and it's a 5-note scale, so we play 5 notes, then it starts over in the new octave. And the blues scale is very similar to the pentatonic minor scale. We're basically just adding 1 note. So here are the pentatonic minor and blues scales. try your hand at improvisation. The G major scale pattern fits over the G, C, D, G chord progression. So you could either record the progression or get somebody else to play it, and then experiment with some of the notes in that scale to try to come up with your own melodies. Or if you wanted to use the minor scale patterns, the A minor and the A pentatonic minor, those would fit over the A minor, C, F major 7, E minor chord progression. And I've given that to you on the open chord chart. So just keep in mind that with improvisation, there's really no right or wrong. It's really just about trying to create music through trial and error, basically. So it's nothing to fear. Give it a shot. So by learning scales, there are a few different things you can begin to do. One, you can practice till you're blue in the face and impress the world with your chops. Maybe not too musical, but it is a lot of fun. The second thing you can do is use your scale patterns to start playing melodies and classics. And a third thing you can do is begin to use your scale patterns for improvising and trying to create your own melodies. So stick with it, my friends. It is very well worth your time and trouble. Now it's time to cast our picks aside. We're going to learn about picking with the fingers. I'm mostly going to cover arpeggiating with the fingers, but we'll also take a look at finger picking for rhythm and lead. Now you can apply this to either acoustic or electric guitar, as with everything in this video. Here we have the picking hand. So each finger has its own letter, P, I, M, A, and C. The C finger, the pinky, is rarely used in traditional finger picking. I never use it, so I'm not going to include it in the examples. Now a general rule of thumb for the thumb is that the thumb plucks the bass strings, the low E, the A, and the D strings. Then the treble strings, G, B, and high E, each get their own picking finger. So the I finger covers the G string, the M finger covers the B string, and the A finger covers the high E string. Now this is just a general guideline. You always have to adapt the picking fingers to the needs of the song. Now in the written lessons I've given you 6 different finger picking patterns using the D chord. So by now we should all know D. If you haven't learned it yet, take a pause, go learn it, and then come back. So first I'll go through each pattern, and then we'll look at applying some of these patterns to a few tunes. Now let's start out by anchoring down on the D chord, and then placing your picking fingers above their assigned strings. Now keep in mind that the picking motion should come from the large joint in the finger, so here, here, and here. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the different finger picking patterns. The first pattern is very straightforward. We're just going up through the chord one string at a time. The second pattern is basically a descending pattern. We play the open D string and then go up to the high E string and work our way down the strings. The third pattern does some string skipping. We play D, B, G, and then high E. The fourth pattern is very similar to the first pattern. The only difference is that it begins with playing the open D string and the high E strings together. fifth pattern uses a 3-note PIM picking pattern. The sixth pattern just goes all the way up the chord and back down using 6 notes. Exercise number 7 in the written lessons takes the 6th finger picking pattern and makes a musical exercise by doing variations on the D chord. So in the first measure we would just play the chord straight through. On the second measure we would lift the finger off of the high E string and play it through. On the third measure we would put the pinky on the 3rd fret of the high E string and play it through. And then on the 4th measure back to the regular old D chord. So altogether it sounds like this. The next example is a tune of mine, Mystical Mood, a very old and very repetitious tune. It's based on a 4-chord progression and it uses the first finger picking pattern. It goes like this. The difficulty on that lies in the finger stretching on the first 2 chords. Now this progression makes a nice background for those of you who wish to hone your improv skills. You could record that, put it on a loop, and then work on your minor scales, your A minor and your A pentatonic minor scales over that progression. Okay, next we'll take a look at another finger picking tune. It's a little harder but also a little more fun. You know, sometimes a song can make a real pro out of you. What I mean is that sometimes a song can make you sound a lot better than you really are. What I just played there, a little piece of my song Daybreak, is a good example. It's one of those tunes where it's not technically very complicated, but if you can learn it, play it at a moderate tempo, it makes you sound like a pretty decent player. That tune uses the PIM finger picking pattern. It's the 5th finger picking pattern. So most of the action of this song comes from the picking hand. You'll notice that the left hand doesn't move around very much, and this song also uses a lot of open strings, which makes it easy. Now here are the 2 main sections of the tune, the first section and second section. And down here are these 2 lines and dots. That represents a repeat sign. So in this case we would repeat the first part 4 times and the second part just once. So it starts out with the C chord. So you start out, anchor down a C chord, play the first 3 notes, the lowest 3 notes, and go up 3 notes, and then etc., etc. Now in the written lessons I've given you this entire tune, and it makes a nice finger picking study. It's a tune where if you learn it, you'll see that it's not that difficult, and then you'll have a finger picking tune under your belt. So now let's take a brief look at finger picking for rhythm and lead. For rhythm, we use the C, A minor, D minor, G chord progression, giving each chord 2 beats. First, we'll play the bass note with the thumb, then the highest notes of the chord we'll play with the I, M, and A fingers. So like this. Another variation of that would be to alternate between quarter notes and 8th notes, like this. Another technique would be to play the bass notes on the beat and then the highest notes on the end of the beat, like this. Okay, now let's take a look at lead. For playing single notes with the fingers, it's generally recommended to alternate between the I and the M fingers. So for example, here's the pentatonic minor scale using finger picking. And for finger picking, that's it. Well friends, that's it for now. Hopefully you've learned a few things and had a little fun along the way. I know I've had a lot of fun and even I've learned a few things. Okay, well, maybe I haven't, but I've had a lot of fun not learning them. Now just keep in mind that with the guitar, there's a lot you can be shown, but a lot is also learned just by doing it. So jump in, get your feet wet, and before you know it, things will begin to click. Thank you so much for tuning in, and best of luck to you.